Hello. In today's discussion, we are going to be talking about managing conflicts. More specifically, we're going to go over considerations when dealing with a conflict, something called principled negotiation, and constructive conflict skills when it comes to communication. So, obviously, conflicts are things that we have to deal with in a variety of settings, whether it's our personal lives or professional lives. And there's some basic things that you want to consider context wise right at the outset. So the first thing is the interests of both parties, okay, or the people involved, right? Second one is the relationship. And third is the people involved. And all of these dynamics, we're going to come back to them as we go through some other concepts within this video. So the interests of both parties, what I'm referring to here is basically what does somebody want to accomplish? Now, that may seem kind of obvious, but it isn't always obvious, and here's why. There's a difference between somebody's interests and their position. And again, that's something we're going to talk about a little bit further on in this video. So, interests are basically what do you really want? Positions is how are you trying to get it? Okay. So, for example, let's say that you're somebody who for a career you decide I want to set my own schedule, I want to have a chance to make a lot of money, and also potentially maybe work from home. And so those are your interests, those are the things you're looking for in a job. And let's say you decide to obtain that, you become a real estate agent. So that's your position, that's how you're going to try to accomplish it. Now, so you may go in, you may become a real estate agent, be very successful, and that makes you happy. It satisfies your interest. Now, you also may become a real estate agent, and maybe it's not working out the way you thought, or you aren't successful at it, and you realize that this position is not the best way to satisfy my interests, and maybe I need to look at a different position. And later, in fact, later we're going to talk about how it's important to stay true to your interests, but be flexible on your positions. But for purposes of our just initial conversation here, what I just want to point out is that there is a difference, and sometimes you have to ask yourself, what does somebody really want? Now, sometimes that is as obvious as what they're asking for, but my point is it's not always, right? Sometimes it's not quite the same as their position. And so, right away, when you're dealing with a conflict, the first thing you want to do is kind of ask yourself, okay, what do I think at a base gut level everybody's looking for? The relationship. What I'm talking about here is basically how important or significant is this relationship right now and long term. Okay. So if you're in a professional sense and you're dealing with a sale, and let's say it's a one-time sale, you're probably never gonna deal with this customer or client again. So if there's something going on and it affects the relationship of the people involved, that's not necessarily something that's going to be a big deal because you don't anticipate having other sales with them, right? Dealing with them in the future. But in your interpersonal life, right? If you're having a fight with your spouse or your children, right? That relationship you deal with for decades, right? For the rest of your life. And so it kind of matters, right? That you don't harm that relationship or staying in the business context. Like if it's a repeat or a referral customer and you're going to keep getting repeat business or you expect to get referrals from them, it matters to like attune to that relationship, right? To like ask yourself, well, whenever I try to settle this conflict or negotiate an agreement or a deal, I do need to do it in a way that does not harm the relationship of the people involved because I'm going to keep dealing with these people down the road. Okay, so that's basically just saying is consider the relationship. How much does this relationship matter, right? How much does it matter? How much do I need to care about it? In fact, just a little side point about this notion about relationships and repeat referral customers. So if you think about it, it is very hard for a business to succeed. And I do not care if you are McDonald's or Apple. Okay, it does not matter. It's very hard for any business to succeed, by the way, if I put two constraints on. And they're as follows. I say you cannot have a repeat customer and you cannot have a referral customer. Now, what's going to happen there? The reason that you won't succeed just in a sustainability sense is because you just run out of customers, right? So if you're just like cutting the best deal for you and you're burning those relationships, you're not getting people to come back to you because you basically burnt them in the deal. They got taken advantage of. So you don't get repeats, you don't get referrals, you run out of customers, and your business dies, right? So it is important to care about getting repeats and referrals. You have to, because eventually you just run out of customers, right? So if you're in this for the long haul in any kind of like business situation, you do have to consider relationships, because in the long haul you need them to stay involved, right? Long term. So just consider the relationship of the parties. How much does it matter, right? I mean, I think in the interpersonal sense, it's like that classic phrase, like I'm sure you know, you've heard it's like happy wife, happy life. Have you heard that phrase? Right? Happy happy husband, happy life. I don't know. Make it neutral on both sides. Like it's the point about like you got to pick and choose your battles, right? Like sometimes the relationship is more important than winning the argument or winning the deal in a business situation. So consider the relationship. Okay, and then the people involved. And what I'm talking about there is basically some things that, again, we're going to talk about in a few slides here, but it basically just deals with how do they resolve conflicts, how much are they caring about the relationship, right? Like it's just considering them. So a good example of this would be like at an extreme end is um so if I asked most people and I said, should you, and again, just sticking in a business situation, and I said, should you be honest? Should you be honest with people? And if I just ask that on a survey, I'm going to get overwhelmingly like 99% of people. If I was in a business class and I said, should you be honest in your dealings and try to be fair in your dealings? About 99% of people are going to say yes, absolutely. Okay. And you're going to have the 1% that say, well, it depends on the situation. And I don't want to give away trade secrets, right? I don't want to tell them how the sausage is made, like all this sorts of stuff, right? But for the most part, people are going to say it's a good idea. And I would agree that's typically a good idea. But here's the problem. Again, another maybe kind of like happy wife, happy life. Maybe I'm just going to use a bunch of old man sayings today. But here's another one. Honesty only works with honest people. Okay. So I got news for you. If you're dealing with a bunch of liars and thieves and you're trying to be honest and a saint, you're going to get taken advantage of in the deal. That conflict is not going to be resolved well. In an interpersonal setting, if you try to be fair and consider the relationship and be respectful and consider the importance of this relationship when you try to resolve a problem, but the other side is abusive and not respectful and doesn't really show that they care about the relationship, you're going to get taken advantage of. So on an extreme end, when I say consider the people, what I'm saying is you have to ask yourself, am I dealing with somebody who's going to be fair to me? Are they being honest with me? Do they care about this relationship? Right? Are they defensive? Like maybe I guess you could probably see this in like fights. If you've like in your personal life, you ever been in a fight with somebody and you're trying to give them like it's turning into a fight, like they're getting defensive, right? And you're trying to give them like constructive criticism, for example. Well, what's going on there, right? You're trying to be helpful. You're trying to give them legitimate constructive criticism to help a situation or improve on something, and they're just getting defensive. Well, again, your helpful advice doesn't mean anything when you're talking to a brick wall, right? So you have to consider the people involved. How do they act? What do they care about? What matters to them? And how are they going to treat me? And you kind of have to adjust accordingly. Now, I'm not saying you totally go out from what you think is the right way to behave, but what I'm saying is you do sometimes have to make adjustments and consider the people. So these are just some broad things to consider whenever you're dealing with conflicts. Other considerations when handling specifically now intercultural negotiations or intercultural. We're going to focus more on business settings here, but considerations when dealing with an intercultural context, because this series of videos are really focusing on intercultural dynamics in communication. So a couple things you have to consider. So one is divergent customs. So in other words, understand the common practices and customs of the groups you're dealing with. A good example of this is some tend to be more formal than others and how they expect negotiations to work out, how to handle them in a business sense, right? Some expect you to be more formal, and some cultures and groups will expect you to be more personable than formal, right? How important is relationship building? This is something else that really varies by culture that you have to consider. In some cultures, it's all about those relationships, and if you have those relationships, people are gonna give you the benefit of the doubt and be more willing to work with you. And if you don't, then they might be more skeptical of you. I've actually seen that in my field in certain dynamics where there's certain like ethnic cultures where uh, for example, I was involved in a series of cases with this firm one time, and they actually happened to be dealing with one particular ethnic group, and we had some attorneys and some paralegals that were also members of that group. They were in that community, and it turns out the clients of the firm from that community really only trusted working with them. And even other attorneys from the firm, they just didn't trust because they just kind of saw them as outsiders because we weren't members of that community, right? So relationships sometimes really matter. Have you established the trust and that sort of stuff? It kind of just depends on the group, but it's something to consider. Understanding different substantive beliefs about agreements. So in other words, sometimes you'll have different cultures that view agreements, or, and again, I'm kind of looking at this from a business context, in a different way. So some view them as more like, okay, that's it, they're final. And some view them as more of a continuing dialogue, right? That they're always open to adjustment and renegotiation and interpretation. So you have to consider that as well. And another thing, in all practical sense, that you might want to consider, and it depends on if you're going to go into, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or you're going into business. And since we're kind of focusing a little bit more on those types of conflicts, at least in this, for this part of our discussion, excuse me, is you might want to consider just hiring a consultant. You might want to consider having somebody from that community. In fact, that example I used about the firm earlier, that's actually how we first ended up, at least from with the paralegals and stuff, is we went out and purposely tried to find, at least I should say we, it wasn't, I didn't run the firm, but the firm went out to purposely try to find paralegals and law clerks who were from that community who could help, right, with that, with not just a communication gap, but that relationship gap, right, to help build the trust, to help have a member of their community that they can interact with one on one, to be sort of the point, the face, right, of the firm for them. And so sometimes you need to do that. You just need to hire somebody who's on the inside who knows the group, and it's just worth it sometimes. So it's something to consider if you're dealing with a group that you really, especially if the group's really foreign to you, right, that you're just not sure of. And to give you an idea of like, so, because people will say, hey, pay attention to cultural differences and differences in groups when you deal with them. And people go, yeah, I'll figure it out, right? I won't do anything stupid. And so to give you an example, this is a recent study done on how do other countries and cultural groups, whether it's nationalities or ethnic groups, how do they rate people from the U.S., whether it's private enterprise and business or government contracts and things like that, when it comes to negotiating deals and agreements, right? And these are done every couple of years by various different studies, and platforms will do these. So here's an example of where we rank by other countries, including countries we've dealt with, and group culture, not just countries, right? It's called different cultural groups, things like that, outside the U.S. mainstream. And we it's kind of a poor report card, right? As you can see. So preparation, B minus, okay, that's not too bad, right? Synergistic approach. So in other words, are you looking for a win-win? You're not just trying to like, there's this phrase from sports. For those of you that are sports fans, I've mentioned being a sports fan a lot in these videos. Um, there's a phrase called, like, some in sports, where sports fans will say, or you hear the phrase being used, win the trade, which is when you win the trade, right? It means you got the better end of the deal, right? And one of the things, so whenever we think of like negotiation or conflict resolution, we tend to think of win the trade. But in real world, you kind of don't want to win the trade. What you want is for both sides to win the trade, right? You want a win-win, because again, you want repeats and referrals, right? So it's not the same context, but sometimes we get in our head the win the trade mindset of like, I've got to beat the other guy, I got to one them up. That's not what this is about. Typically, you want repeats and referrals, so you want a win-win situation. So we get a D on that one. Cultural IQ, so just understanding the other culture. D. Adapting the negotiation process to the host country environment. D. Patience. D. Listening. D, man. Linguistic abilities, so actual communication. Well, there's an F. We finally passed something. C, for using language that is simple and accessible. So, okay, doing a little better there. High aspirations, B plus. Okay, that's a little better, right? Like, so in other words, trying to really like think big, right? Have a growth mindset of like coming to agreements, like coming to big deals and things like that. And personal integrity, A minus. Okay, so we're kind of giving the benefit of the doubt in terms of our hearts in the right place despite a lot of these poor grades, and building solid relationships. Again, you need repeats, referrals. D. So a lot of bad grades here. And here's why these are. By the way, I hear you. Now some of you are sitting there going, "Hey man, D's get degrees, right?" Well, I got first of all, D's don't always get degrees, right? So depending on your major, D's do not always count to be applied towards a degree. So you get credit for it, but it doesn't always apply towards a degree. So D's do not always get degrees. But here's the other thing. This isn't pass fail, because here's the problem. When you take these grades, you have to remember you're getting compared to somebody else. Like when you take a class, you get a grade. All you're competing with is getting a passing score to like count for credit. So you're competing with you, with me, myself, and I. So when you get out into a business context like this, here's why the D's are all failing, and anything below an A is a potential fail and catastrophic. Here's why. Because they have choices. It's not just you competing against you to pass a class. So if you're getting a D in something and somebody else gets an A in it, who are they going to cut the deal with? The person who's an A. Right? So you're being compared to other people, or in this case, U.S. negotiators being compared to people from other cultures. And if you're not as good, you're not going to get the deal done. They're going to go with the better option, right? That's the thing about life that you got to remember. It's like in life, whenever you are being compared to other people, it highlights and hides your strengths and weaknesses. And I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that you're being compared, right? Like in a classroom or a lab setting, you're really just like working towards an individual score and you're not being compared. But this is what happens in the real setting, right? Like I bring this up when I teach public speaking classes, is you can give a speech in a class and 20 students give 25 speeches on 25 topics. And whether or not you did good or did well or poorly on the topic, it's kind of debatable because everybody gave speeches on different topics and the audience might know nothing about the topic. I, grading the speech, might know nothing about the topic. But in real life, you go in, you give a speech, they're not just hearing 25 people on 25 topics. They're hearing 4 people on the same topic, right? And if you're terrible, you're going to stand out. Now, why are you going to stand out? Because you're being compared to somebody else, right? It's different than a classroom setting. So, they're giving grades here, but what I want you to remember is anything below an A should be alarming. Because in this context, because you're being compared, right? Anything below an A means somebody else could beat you. Somebody else can walk in the room and do better. And they're the one who's going to get the deal done. So just maybe too much of a tangent on that, but that's just something to keep in mind. So we tend not to score well on these things, these perception of us. Let's go through some quick little cultural examples of negotiation styles across different cultures. So let's look at Latin America. Relationships are very important in Latin American countries. So it matters to build that trust, the connection, people that you're used to dealing with over time. Unfortunately, there is a lot of bribery that goes on in a lot of these countries. Government is heavily involved in business dealings. But again, going back to relationships, negotiations are a lot of times chosen based on family connections, political influence, education, and gender. Can also play a role, but again, that's a lot of focus on these different connections and relationships, right? And by the way, when I say gender plays a role, because a lot of Latin American cultures tend to be very masculine oriented, females are usually in the background for a lot of negotiations. It's harder for them to sort of rise to the top of leading these sorts of deals and businesses. I mean, I think there's some weird things going on. Like certainly you can see some modern examples of that changing. So like Mexico currently, at least at the time of this video, they have a Latin American president, right? And I personally think from somebody with a background in communication as well as communication and like media and pop culture and things like that, that I personally think like American culture, we get credit for being supposedly very gender neutral or equal or trying to promote gender equality. But personally, I actually think we're very masculine, and I think women are certainly they're not necessarily pushed to the background, but I certainly think our culture objectifies women extensively, and in fact, I think that's getting worse, not better. So I think some of the American notion of like gender equality is a little bit fake, just personal, but it's a personal educated opinion as somebody who studies media and sort of and communication and sort of how the sexes are represented. But anyway, maybe that's a personal tangent. But yeah, so I think the American perception's a little fake, and we tend to be more masculine oriented than we like to admit. Anyway, this is what happens in Latin American cultures. They will also tend to like, so relationships are important, and they get emphasized, and a lot of times what they'll do is they'll have like a series of meetings, so it's a long kind of process. It's not like a let's meet once and get the deal done, right? So it'll be a series of meetings that you build up to this, right, to sort of iron everything out. It's not really like just done in one shot like a lot of times in American culture, and they don't really see time as big of an essential thing as just like going through this process of building relationships and working out the deals. So they're not going to be as time oriented. Time is not, to use the term from the legal community, sometimes they'll say time is of the essence, meaning it's an important factor. And in fact, business contracts will say that sometimes time is of the essence. If I ask you to deliver a certain amount of wheat or whatever it may be, right, it has to be here by that time. And if I don't get it by that time, that's material. That's a major issue, right? But in a lot of these cultures, it's not. And not only are they kind of informal, they'll have several meetings. A lot of times, too, they'll be informal just in how the meetings take place. So they'll take place over lunch, they'll take place over dinner, they'll take place over wine, versus having the conference room meeting that American meetings and conference rooms that American culture tends to emphasize. So those are just kind of some differences. And if we want to look at like sort of China and Asian cultures, right? They will display strong manners and hospitality. And so it's a big thing there to be respectful, right? And to make sure that you're showing the proper deference and respect for a given group that you're working with and that sort of stuff. They will even sometimes give small gifts within the process, right, of coming to that agreement. They will also emphasize a lot relationships. It's very important, right, that you've built a strong relationship, and trust is important. Can I trust, based on your prior behavior, can I trust you moving forward to do what's not just in your best interest, but what's in our best, both of us, when I say our best interests, right? Excuse me. They will actually sometimes prefer to have some intermediaries get involved. So I mentioned about hiring a consultant. Sometimes that's a factor to consider, but they will sometimes kind of prefer this to have like sort of a third party to kind of help, ease some of those some potential conflicts and sort of like improve sort of the communication across both the cultural barriers and things like that. They tend to rarely use lawyers. It's more of, hey, this is the deal. We're going to work it out. They tend to not get the lawyers involved as much. American culture, we do get the lawyers involved a lot, just to kind of more to just cover your own butt kind of thing. That's a lot of what lawyers are doing, and for both parties in these contracts in the U.S., but they tend to use them less. And they are willing to compromise. Like if they can trust you that you will make a concession as well, then they tend to be willing to compromise. They tend to be willing to adjust. They're flexible on their positions. So remember before I said there's a difference between your interests and your positions. And your interests is again what you want. Your positions is how you accomplish it. And they're willing to kind of be flexible on that. Okay. Negotiation styles in terms of high and low context. So if you've been watching these videos, you know that I've talked a lot about high versus low context, which is high context cultures and low context cultures really can just kind of change a focus on self-expression and how you communicate in terms of being respectful to other people and not offending them. So that's kind of like what they're focused on here, right? And high context culture is basically it's okay to communicate and express yourself, but you want to do it in a way that is not offensive, right? That's not going to harm other people's identities or just harm the cohesion in the group. And low context, it's more about get your point across, right? Say what you want to and need to say, and we're not going to really worry too much about if people are offended. It's about you getting that message out there. So again, high context, establish social trust first is very important because again, they care about the relationships, value personal relationships and goodwill. Agreements are usually made because of that trust, right? And sometimes they're just based on that trust. And now, one of the things about this, though, is if in any kind of situation, like if you're really valuing relationships and building trust and like that, it means it can just take longer. right, to get a deal done because you're just dealing with people that need to be comfortable first. It just takes longer to seal the deal, right? Low context cultures, American culture, and you'll see the swing here. So the high context of things like a lot of Asian cultures, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Arab, Greek, Spanish, right? And then you have North America, Swiss, German cultures tend to be the more low context, right? So they'll basically try to cut the deal early, get down to business right away. Just the facts, ma'am. Uh, Dragnet reference, old movie, old show. Uh, get down to business first, right? Value expertise and performance, right? So they're big on, hey, what's the basic production here? What are you giving me? How are you performing? They will generally come to be very specific, very detail oriented with agreements, and they try to be efficient, right? They try to negotiate this stuff efficiently. They tend to not focus on relationships beyond. I mean, I don't want to burn the person, right? Because again, you do want repeats and referrals, but at the end of the day, it is about getting the deal done, right? And yeah, you want a deal that's workable for both sides, but there's less of this emphasis, right, on let's build a relationship of trust and all this stuff first, right? So just a slightly different focus, and sometimes it's not that one way is right or wrong because you can also make an argument that it depends on the situation, right, as to what matters. So on this next slide, now we're going to start to talk about some ways to. So we've talked about some dynamics involved with cultures and some things to consider, which is like the people involved. How important is this relationship to you? Their interests versus their positions. And now we're going to start to talk about, okay, how can you actually negotiate with people and get them to yes, right? Take a conflict, take a problem, and get them to come to a mutual agreement. And we're going to talk, now I'm synthesizing this down. You could take whole college courses just on this next concept alone. But we're going to talk about something called principled negotiation. And so what this is a way to manage and resolve conflicts, right, in an effective way. So it's very detailed, and it gives you a lot of really actionable steps you can use in terms of communication to resolve conflicts. All right, so the first thing I just want to talk about here real quickly is when you have a problem, to resolve that problem. I say negotiation because we're focusing on business, but really this could apply to any problem, a fight you're having in an interpersonal situation, right? There's really the following outcomes that can happen whenever there's a problem with something. So you have avoidance. That's like a lose-lose scenario. So you have a problem, you just don't deal with it. So when I teach interpersonal communication and we talk about relationships, right? Well, what's one of the most destructive things that happen in a relationship is you have a problem, and because people don't deal with the problem, its magnitude gets worse and worse, and eventually it can lead to a problem that becomes a deal breaker, right? That irreparably destroys the relationship. Sometimes because it's a big deal to begin with, right? And it's not addressed, so therefore it destroys the relationship. Sometimes because it's not a big deal necessarily, like the substance of it, but the fact that it was never dealt with allowed it to like fester and grow, right, into a bigger problem than it was to begin with. Or people look at it as like the straw that broke the camel's back. So in other words, it says something larger about our relationship that you didn't fix this. It says something about maybe your respect for me or you're caring for the situation or us. And so therefore, again, it's the straw that broke this camel's back. You might remember from an earlier video, I mentioned that when you communicate with somebody, there's two levels of the communication. There's the substantive component and the relational component, right? So the substantive component is what are we talking about? The relational component is what does this say about us? So again, it's like you have a fight. Whatever you're fighting about is the substantive component. Okay? How you're fighting, if that is saying something about your respect for the other person in a positive or negative way, that's the relational component. So an example would be if somebody who is abusive in a fight at a real extreme end, the abusive aspect of it that is the relational component that says something about your respect for them, right? And obviously not something good. Or if you hang up on them or you're just saying derogatory things to them, right? Or you're cutting them off, you're not listening, right? That says something, right? So it's like if you have a problem, you don't fix it. It's not that the problem itself is a big deal. I'm sure a lot of you have been in relationships, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's not that the problem itself was a big deal, but the fact that they didn't fix it after you told them it mattered, right, is what hurt you, right? Because you feel like it says something about how much they care about us or you. So that's why avoidance can just create all kinds of problems. So that's a lose-lose. It never works out. The only way that ever works out is if the person who has the problem just kind of gets over it and lets it go. And you're basically just playing Russian roulette hoping that happens. And so it's usually a lose-lose strategy. It could happen, but again, typically nobody wins. Okay, competing. So this is win-lose. This is win the trade, right? This is I want to one-up you in the deal. Again, okay, that's great for competitive situations. If you're the GM of a sports team, more power to you. But in real life situations, that's not good because you lose repeat and referrals. Accommodating. So this is typically a win-lose. Also, this is where you basically give in and you basically just compromise for the other side. Now, it doesn't mean that's never the style to take or the outcome to seek. Sometimes something's not worth. It's okay to just kind of take the loss. It's not worth fighting about, right? So you just take the L, as the kids say. I mean, sometimes you just got to pick and choose your battles, and it's okay to do that. Or you compromise on something just because you know what, I'm willing to compromise on this. It's fine. I'd rather see them win or be happy, right? Compromising. So this is kind of like when both sides give and get something. So it's kind of a win-lose for both sides. And then collaborating, of course, is a win-win. Now that's the optimal outcome, right? The outcome you want is for both parties to be happy, right? So that's basically what you're looking for. Okay, so those are common outcomes, and principal negotiation, which we're going to talk about, is kind of focusing on getting a win-win, right? So another quick little thing here to think about is common negotiation styles. So common negotiation styles are basically how people tend to, without training, approach situations, right? Like when there's conflicts, whether it's in their personal lives or professional lives. So you have soft bargaining, hard bargaining, and bargaining from positions. So soft bargaining is basically people that are easily willing to compromise and really being careful to give deference to the other side. So these are basically the people who are always willing, right, to basically solve the fight if it's an interpersonal setting or give in, give a concession, or even in business professional settings, like they're perfectly willing to be flexible to just keep things moving forward. Okay. That can be efficient in terms of resolving problems. That can sometimes be the best way to resolve something because it's just not worth the fight. But obviously, that's also running the risk of getting taken advantage of, right? If the other person is sort of sees, it's like the classic give an inch, they'll take a mile, right? So sometimes people will take advantage of you if they think this is a common tactic of yours. Hard bargaining. So this is when you stick to your position, having little regard for the other party. So this is basically like you take your position. This is what I'm going to do. And the other party comes at you with, well, instead of A, how about we do B or C? And you just won't budge, right? That's usually, I mean, these are the people that take a position and when they're given an off road, they're given an alternative, they just won't take it. Or they take a position and they're proven wrong. They're just clearly wrong, right? Like think of fights that people have, right? You're clearly wrong. And they just double and triple down, right? They're like, I'm planting my flag. I'm dying on this hill. Okay. We all know that people do that. There are mass groups of people that will do that. Will never admit they're wrong and just double and triple down. Now, why does that happen? Now, look, some of this is just basic human psychology. People have egos. They don't like to admit that they're wrong. They don't like to admit that they were wrong. They don't like to admit they misjudged something. They don't like to admit they took a poor position, right? Sometimes this happens even in people's interpersonal lives. You know, I mentioned before, like this example of you want to work from home, you want unlimited financial growth potential, and you also kind of want to set your own schedule, so you decide to become a real estate agent. Now, again, let's say you become a real estate agent, but you're not happy with it for some reason, or there's like a housing crisis where like people just aren't buying homes. It's just not working for you. So there's people who will find themselves in that situation, and like you might have one person who just kind of gives up, right? And they're just like, well, screw it, man. I mean, I just can't be happy, and this just didn't work, and they're just all upset and they end up doing something else. Versus now, what's that person doing? They're hard bargaining with themselves. Like they took a position on how they were going to be happy in life, And then when it didn't work out, all they did was they like gave up and became bitter, right? We all know people that have had that happen to them in different situations. Now, that person, if they were more flexible and instead said, okay, this position did not work out, but I don't have to stick to it. There's other jobs that could give me unlimited financial wealth and let me work from home and set my own schedule. There's lots of businesses that I could do that with, right? That's somebody who's flexible with their position. So I guess my point is don't hard bargain with yourself, man. Don't double and triple down with yourself when it turns out you were wrong, right? Like, so you can apply this not just like with other people, but sometimes with ourselves. So hard bargaining, people just like walk in the room and they're just like, this is what I want, and if I don't get it, like that's it, I'm done. Now, I'm not saying, obviously in life, whether it's your personal life or professional life, there are things that are deal breakers that you have to have. But here's my point. Those things are usually interests, not positions. Again, go back to that job example. The person's interest was the money, the free time, work from home. You don't have to compromise those. What you compromise, and therefore not hard bargain with yourself, is how you're going to get them. How you going to get them? Right? That's what you need to be flexible on. Right? If you want to be happy in life, like in anything, like there's an argument to be made that, in other words, is that you stick to your interests, right? You hold them dear and you fight for them till the end, but you be flexible on your positions. In other words, how do you get them? Because sometimes things are going to change. New information comes into play. Even your interests might truly change where you have to adjust them, which then adjust the position. But the point is, your interests are what are sacred, not your positions, man. And hard bargaining is the people that say, this is how I'm getting what I want, and I won't adjust on how I'm getting it. Usually that's a bad idea, right? Because you're not flexible at all. And you just have to have like the perfect match to get a deal done. All right, bargaining from position. This is negotiation based only on your stated position, right? So you come in the room and you're like, this is how I'm getting what I want, and you will not move off that. It's obviously very similar to hard bargaining, right? Where you just stick to your position, have little regard for other people. Bargaining from position is a negotiation only based on your position. So you might be asking, okay, what's the difference? The only difference actually is just that somebody could bargain from position and still be respectful for the other people, right? Those are basically somebody who comes in the room and says, this is what I want, this is how I'm getting it. Or they just say, this is what I want to get, right? They don't really say the interest, they just say the position. And they're still respectful. Like, you can be respectful of somebody else to say, this is what I want, this is what I'm looking for in life. But the hard bargaining is usually that, and then a little something extra, which is that I really don't care if it pisses you off, right? And so those are, again, usually just kind of like dumb tactics because you're not giving yourself the best chance to work out an agreement. And I'm going to give you an example of that in a second. But those are the common sort of like bargaining tactics. So what is principled negotiation? What it basically is a way to get a win-win, and it's just very detailed oriented. So here's what you're looking for in a principled negotiated agreement. Okay, you want an agreement that has the following three criteria. It meets the interests of both parties, not the positions, the interests. Okay, and again, I'm going to give you an example of a real one that I dealt with. Meets the interest of both parties. 2, it's efficient. So it doesn't waste time, it doesn't waste resources, because that can build resentment, right? And then 3, it's sustainable. Can you continue to do this? Right? Long term. So you're looking for something that it's a win-win because it meets the interests of both parties. It's efficient, and then also it's sustainable. So that's what we're trying to get. So how the heck do we get it? So the first one, separate the people from the problem. That's the first step. Focus on interests, not positions. Develop multiple solutions. Have objective standards for judging the outcome, and create an alternative, or what's called a BATNA and a tripwire. So a lot of terms there, but this is basically a process to make sure that you get a win-win, or just kind of at least a better deal for yourself. Now I'm going to give you an example of this in a real setting But I'm gonna give you an example of how you could apply this to your own life without even negotiating with somebody else, but just to get a better deal for your, like in a situation. So we're gonna talk about that. So you want to kind of go through this whole process. So separate the people from the problem. What the heck does that mean? Basically, it means don't blame them for the problem. Okay. Be civil throughout the process, clarify misconceptions, and make them a part of the process for finding a solution. So I think I gave you the example of a student or employee that's always late to class or to like a weekly meeting in the morning. So not separating the people from the problem is they come in late and you're like, hey, dude, fix your attitude. We need you to be here on time. You need to care about this class more, or you need to care more about this job. You got to fix your attitude. You're always late. So what did I just do? I blame them for the problem, right? If you have friends coming over, you have roommates, the roommate's messy, they've got their crap in the living room, and you tell your roommate, hey man, you need to pick up your crap. It's everywhere. And I got friends coming over here. Like you want to be a slob in your room, that's fine, but not in the like communal space. Okay, come on. Help me out. You just blame them for the problem. You basically walked in the room and were like, we've identified the problem. It's right there. It's you. Right? That's what most exes would say about me, but they're probably right. I mean, some say I'm the Tin Man, which means I don't have a heart. It's harsh, huh? But that's what they say about me. I don't know. It could be true. I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, sorry. I digress. Personal problems, right? Say it's you. So look, when you said the employee, um, when you say the problem is your attitude sucks, you got to get to class on time, you got to get to work on time, or the problem is you're a slob, pick up your crap in the living room. You've walked into the situation, said the problem is you, man, you're a slob and your attitude sucks. Most people don't respond to that well. They get defensive. People have egos, right? You are blaming them for the problem. The problem is them. Well, if the problem is me, right, it's kind of hard for me to fix that, right? Because you're saying the problem is I'm just inherently awful, right? I mean, that's not great, right? So they're just going to get defensive. They're not going to respond to that. I had mentioned earlier video, you need to keep the end in mind. Well, in other words, what is your goal? Your goal is to get the person to show up to the meeting or the class on time. Your goal is to get them to pick up their stuff out of the living room. And that does not accomplish the goal. So you separate the people you separate the people from the problem by not blaming them for the problem. You just identify what the problem is. You're like, hey, I'm having friends coming over later. We're going to be in the living room. Could you pick up your stuff from the living room before they get here? They're much less likely to get defensive about that. You didn't call them a slob. You didn't say they're a big jerk for leaving their crap in the living room. Or if I said, hey, in the meetings in the morning, we kind of assign what everybody's doing that day and what projects they're working on. So when you're late, we've already assigned the project, so it creates a problem. Now we got to reassign stuff, and it just creates all kinds of issues. So we really kind of need you to be here on time. Is there something going on as to why you're not able to make it here? I've identified the problem, but I didn't blame them for it, right? So that's the first thing. So separate people so people don't get defensive and they're willing to honestly deal with you, okay? Be civil to people, again, so they don't get defensive. If there's anything that's a gray area, clarify the misconception. So like the being late thing, you can ask them. So there's like when I teach classes, if there's a student that's constantly late, eventually you pull them aside and be like, is there something going on? Transportation, coming from another class where you can't be here on time, right? Because sometimes there is actually something really significant going on that you need to like know about, right? So just make sure you clarify that and then make them a part of the solution. Nobody likes it when you walk in the room and you're like, I mean, you've all experienced this. I know what's best for you, right? So you just say like, here's the solution. Here's what you should agree to, right? People need, even if you're like the boss or the manager, I mentioned in an earlier video about how you want to get intellectual and emotional buy-in with decision making. And so you want to ask people their opinion, get their honest feedback, take it under consideration, make them feel like they're a part of the process because they feel valued. It's the same kind of concept here, right? When you're going to come to an agreement, you ask people, so what do you think is the best option? Here's what I'm looking for. What do you think is the best solution? Like open it up, right? When people feel like they're a part of the solution, they feel valued and they're more likely to respond well to the situation. All right, folks, here's the big one. Focus on interest, not position. Interest define the problem, right? Interests are what people really want. You really want free time and to make lots of money and make it from home, right? Focus on that, not position. Interest define the problem. Usually, this is very important. Usually, there are several interests behind every position, and many that will be consistent with the other side interests, and that's where you cut the deal. That's how you get people to say yes to things that on the outside seem like there's no way you can get a deal done. That's how. Because on the outside, based on positions, it seemed like there's no way we can get a deal done. But you know why we can get a deal done? Because our interests are actually kind of close. Or I can meet your interests. Couldn't meet those initial positions, but I can meet the interests that underlie. Okay? And also every interest, and by the way, the reason you can meet it is because a lot of times every interest has more than one solution. There's all kinds of ways to make money, work from home, and have free time. Set your own schedule, right? Then you can develop multiple solutions that can meet as many interests of both sides as possible. Okay? And you're just like basically creating more pieces of the pie to like solve the problem. And you protect, and again, always protect your interest, but willing to compromise on positions. So compromise about how you're going to get there. Be flexible on that because life happens. Things like get in the way, right? There's roadblocks, whether it's life in general, your interpersonal life, or just your professional life, right? Like when it comes to making deals, right? If the other side can't meet your positions, if you're flexible on that and still meet your interests, right, you're probably going to have things work out. So let me give you an example of this. Like, why does interest versus positions matter? Like, specifically with all the things we're talking about in this slide, how this works. Okay, so a couple years ago, I represented a client. He wanted to buy a radio station in the Pacific Northwest. This is a radio station that was doing extremely well with local ratings. This one individual had built it from the ground up. And there were rumors within the industry that he was looking to sell. Okay, and my client was very interested in purchasing this and was willing to pay about $5 million. This thing had been built up, had a lot of popular, well-performing shows and things like that. So he's willing to pay about $5 million. That's what he authorized me to kind of like help with the contract and approach them to deal with the negotiation. So I approached this person and I said, hey, so our position is $5 million, right? We want to get this thing for $5 million. Our interest is we want to buy a radio station, right? Okay, and our position is we're going to pay $5 million from this guy. We're willing to pay him that. So I approach him like, hey, how's it going? Hello. There's a rumor, word on the street is the cool kids are saying that you might be you're interested in selling. Is that true? What's going on with it? What's the dealio? And he said, well, actually, yeah, that's true. I am interested in selling. And I said, okay, how much were you thinking of maybe selling it for? Have you got any offers? And he goes, well, actually, I haven't got any offers. I've been a little tight-lipped about it, but I would like $10 million for this station. So that's his position. So our position, he hasn't heard this from me. I haven't said 5 million yet, right? But let's look at this from the outside. Let's take the helicopter view here. My client will pay 5 million for a radio station. He wants 10 million. On the outside, that looks like a no-go, right? He sold it to us for 5 million. Looks like a no-go. You can get him to yes. All you got to do is focus on these things. So what did I do? I wanted to find out his interest. He's told me his position, 10 million, but he hasn't told me why 10 million, right? Just like, tell me why you want to be a real estate agent. Well, here it's tell me why you want 10 million. How'd you come up with that? So the first thing I said was, okay, 10 million. Did you get it like the business evaluated, like that it's worth that, or have you gotten an offer? Like where did you pull that number from, right? And he said, well, no, I mean, I haven't had it evaluated or anything. It's just a lot of money, man. And I don't really want to sell it. So I figure if I'm going to sell it, I'm going to get my bag. He didn't say get my bag, but, as the cool kids say, you young hip kids say now. He didn't say that, but he was basically saying I'm going to get paid if I'm going to sell it. I don't want to sell it. It's my baby. I built it from the ground up. But I kind of need to. So I just figure it's a lot of money. I've never had that much money, and I just want a lot of money for it. Okay. And I go, oh, well, yeah, that's too bad if you don't really want to sell it. Why don't you want to sell it? What's going on? Again, I'm trying to get him to tell me more interest. He's already told me one, which is that I just want a boatload of cash. Right? Okay. I That's fine. So tell me why you said you don't want to sell it. What's going on? Well, I'm getting older, got to retire, can't work here as much. I manage and run the station. As you know, I built it, and I'm here like 50 hours a week, and I just can't do that anymore. Right? I got to retire. I got to step back. So this is just one of those. I got to step back, and I'd love to stay involved, but I just can't do it. Okay. All right. Well, great. So then I didn't tell him 5 million, right? I said, all right, I'll talk to, I represent somebody obviously, so I'll talk to them and see what we can do, and we'll get in touch, right? Thanks for fancy, nice chat. Okay. All right. Now he has just told me, so the positions 5 versus 10, no go, right? He's told me all kinds of things now in terms of interest. What are his interests? Well, his interests are he wants money, but his interests are also he doesn't really want to sell. And his interests are also he would love to stay involved. And his interests are also, but he needs to retire. So here's what we did. I came back to him and I said, all right, so here's I got an offer for you. Okay, here's the offer. We're gonna give you $5 million. Straight up cash, homie. And if you've never really been a millionaire, $5 million is nothing to sneeze at, right? Like that's still a pretty good bag. I think everybody watching this video would probably take including myself, would take the $5 million bag. Okay. So I'm like, we're gonna give you the money, but I got something better, right? Shh. Hear me out, right? Not only the 5 million, because I know it's not the 10 you had mentioned before, but we're gonna give you the 5 million, but we're also gonna give you a contract where it's a 4-year deal where you get to stay on and manage the station. But you're going to be able to do some of this remotely. So instead of working 50 hours a week, you're going to work less. You're going to work 25, and you can do some of even that from home. You're going to just come in once a week, maybe for 5-6 hours. The rest you're going to do remotely. And in the contract, we'll basically put language in there that pays you the going rate, right? That you'd pay for a manager, right, to run this thing. And we'll put in there like we can't just like fire you the minute we take ownership, right? That you have a 4-year deal and we can only fire you for cause you break the law, something like that, right? So now what's going on? Now and he took the offer and he sold it to us for the 5 million. So what's the difference? Somebody else could come in and offer him 10 million or 7 million or 8 million. Now look, if somebody offered the 10, maybe he takes it. But if he got an offer for 7 or 8, I bet he still takes ours. Because somebody who comes in and says, here's 8 million, all you're doing is giving him the bag. You're just giving him the money. You're satisfying one interest. I'm satisfying the interest of money. I'm giving him 5 million. The interest to stay involved. The interest to retire. I'm giving him everything. Why? Because I talked to him and I focused on why do you want what you want? Why do you want to be the real estate agent? Why do you want the money? Why do you want it? Okay. And that's how you get people to tell you interest. And if you focus on that, when they tell you the why, I got news for you. They're going to tell you whys that you can answer, that solve for. You can come up with solutions for and cut deals. And that's how you can cut deals when it looks like on the outside there's no way we're going to get this agreement because I'm giving you more. I'm giving you the other things. Right? And it doesn't work with everybody because there are obviously some people where maybe the money matters more or less, right? So if this person had already been a millionaire and already had a couple million, maybe the difference between 5 and 10 matters to him, right? But he had said to me he's never really had that kind of just straight cash, right? So he's still going to see the dollar signs and want it, right? So this is why it's important to focus on interest, not positions. And I mentioned before, you should apply this to your personal life as well, right? You should ask yourself, when you take positions, like how you're getting what you want, and if there's roadblocks, you should ask yourself, okay, is there another way to get what I want? This didn't work out. Is there another way? Right? So just keep that in mind. That's always something to consider. Okay. All right, so focus on interests and be willing to be flexible. Develop alternatives. So this is sometimes referred to as a BATNA if you've ever taken stuff in negotiation or conflict resolution, or a tripwire. This is actually really important, and this is the one where I was going to give you a personal, like an example you could just apply to your life. So a BATNA is just a fancy way of saying a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So this is, if you walk away, what else you getting? What else could you get? Right? A tripwire. These are terms better than the BATNA, but are at least but are the least favorable agreement you will accept. So in other words, this is the minimum deal. So I said you can apply this to like decisions you make in your own life. You don't have to be negotiating necessarily with somebody, just like decisions you make, right? And how you can make sure you don't get taken advantage of. All right, so BATNA's best alternative. So the best alternative would be, it's like basically saying, let's say you're shopping for something, and you see it at Target, and you buy it, and then you get home and you look on Amazon and you realize it's way cheaper on Amazon. Okay, that's on you. Like, that's a you problem. And you know what the problem is? You didn't develop a BATNA. You didn't know what your best alternative was. In other words, because you didn't shop around, you didn't know how cheap can I get this. If I don't buy it at Target, what can I get it for? Right? So you didn't know if the Target price was a good price or not because you didn't shop around. So like sometimes learning is remembering, like, you know these concepts, you just never really, and you've applied them, I'm sure you've shopped around, right? But you haven't necessarily thought of them in like the technical sense, right? Or what the terms are, or in terms of negotiation, right? So a best alternative is basically, if I walk away, what are my options, right? So here's the personal example where you can apply this. You go to a job interview. You're going to a job interview. Now, a lot of times for these like these jobs, you get out of school, and it's like these jobs and fields that are going to be your career that you want to go into long term, right? And sometimes for a lot of those jobs, the salary is negotiable. And that's why some employers don't want you to talk with other employees. They like prohibit like discussing salary, because you'll find out the person next to you is making more, right? Because they just negotiated a better deal sometimes. But anyway, you go into these jobs, and it's not like they don't necessarily tell you right away like how much it pays. They'll just say competitive salary. And then you get in the interview room, and they're like, so what were you looking for, right? So the alternative is basically like, let's say you go interview for one of these jobs, and the alternative is basically saying, if I don't take this job, how much can I make somewhere else? What are my options? Right? Because if I'm not a beggar, I can be a chooser. Right? If I've got, what are my alternatives? And more specifically, it's even better if you know, what are my alternatives for this job specifically? So in other words, what should this job pay? What are other people paying for this? So for example, let's say you interview for a job and you're just starting out, and the job pays, I'm just making up, I don't know, it starts out at $50,000 a year. Okay, you know, let me back up a little bit. You're interviewing for a job, and you do your homework, you start researching, and you think typically somebody who's starting out will start out making $50,000 a year. So you know that's the best alternative, that you think it's likely you can get 50. Okay, somewhere. That somebody will give you 50 at a minimum. So that's the best alternative. So first of all, you already know going in, don't take less than 50. Right? It's like, going into Target, don't pay more than $19.99 because I can get it on Amazon for $19.99. Right? So you know that going in, don't take less than 50. And that's how you don't get screwed over, right? You don't agree to a salary of 40 grand when you could have made 50, right? So it's just knowing that. Now, what the tripwire is you need to then set an artificial line. So you need to say the tripwire might be 55. You usually want to make it better than the BATNA, so you're getting a good deal. So with the tripwire, if you make it 55,000, what you're basically doing is you're going into that job interview and you're saying, all right, I know that if I get hired for this job somewhere as somebody who's starting out in this field, I can get 50,000. That seems to be what people are paying, at least to start. So therefore, I want to get 55 out of this. If I get 55, I know I cut a good deal, because there's no guarantee I would have got 55 somewhere else. I just know I probably would get 50, right? So that's where you set the tripwire. So then when you're negotiating with them, what are you looking for, right? You know to don't go below 55. Now, if they do, you see, well, first of all, the tripwire is what you're trying to get, right? So you're trying to get the 55. And so you know generally you don't want to go below that. And even then, you definitely don't want to go below the BATNA per se, right? If it's below 50, then you know you're cutting probably a bad deal financially. Now, does it mean you don't accept it? It depends on the situation, right? Like maybe there are other interests that the position, the job at taking the job, which is the position, maybe there are other interests it satisfies. Maybe it's less of a commute. Maybe it's just a company you really like or believe in, right? Maybe you have friends that work there. Maybe it's just they provide childcare, they have better benefits package. Like there could be other interests that are getting satisfied. But the point is whenever you agree to something, whether it's in a job interview, a salary, or buying something in the store, you got to know what your options are. Because the options tell you what's a good deal or not. When you don't know the options, you don't know what's a deal. Right? And look, some things obviously in life it doesn't matter, and then there's other things it really does matter. So it just depends on what it is. But a BATNA is what if I walk away, man? And you see people screw themselves over because they either don't know what the alternative is, so they agree to 40 when they could have got 50,000, or they don't know what the alternative is, so they walk away and they didn't do their homework and they didn't realize, well, actually, there's no alternative. Like this was the best job that you could have got, and these jobs are hard to find, and there aren't other ones out there, and so you basically end up with a problem that way, right? Or you just don't know where the tripwire line is, right? So you want to set the tripwire line above the BATNA. What the tripwire does is if you get it makes sure you get a good deal because you got something better than what your options are, right? It's like saying, I'll buy it at Target if it's below $19.99 because that's, a better deal, right? So always develop a BATNA, always develop a tripwire. By the way, a little side note here, when you are negotiating, you usually want to ask for more than you really want to start out with. So if 50 is your alternative, 55 is the tripwire because you're trying to make sure you get a deal better than the alternative, which defines what a good deal is. And they say, well, what were you looking for? Well, ask for 60. You don't ask for 55, ask for 60. You want to ask for something more than you really want. It's okay. You've essentially asked for the moon and the stars, essentially. That's okay. Now, the moon, saying you're asking for the moon and the stars might be a bad analogy just in the sense of you need to ask for something in the ballpark. So like if a job should pay 50 to 60, you don't ask for 120,000, right? Because then they're going to laugh you out of the room. Okay? But if you ask for more than you want in a situation, there are three things that can happen. There's three that can happen, okay? And really only two that are likely. So the first one that can happen is they laugh you out of the room and they end discussions. Well, that's not going to happen as long as you're in the ballpark. So as long as you don't ask for 120 or 100, right? But if you ask for 60, they're not just going to stop talking, okay? So what are the other two options? And by the way, they're both good for you. The two realistic options are good for you. Here's what they are. First one is they could just give you the moon and the stars, right? It's like the guy who he won't ask out the girl, because he thinks she's out of his league. And it's like, you ever heard the phrase out kicking your coverage? Anybody ever heard that? It's like an old man phrase I get, maybe. I don't know. It's when you're dating somebody who's out of your league. It's called out kicking your coverage. A little fun fact, a little college knowledge. It's like the guy who he thinks she's out of his league, so he won't ask her out. Well, if you don't ask her out, you're definitely never going to get that girl, right? But when you ask her out, because you're asking for the moon and the stars, she's out of your league, man. Right? It's kind of like me when I approach any woman at this point. But because I'm kind of too far gone, right, to save. But sometimes she'll say yes. Sometimes when you ask for the moon and the stars, spoiler, sometimes you get the moon and the stars. When you ask, sometimes the girl says yes, right? When you ask for 60,000 in the job interview, sometimes they go sure and they give you 60, and you wanted 55, right? So that's one of the scenarios. That's obviously good. Here's the second one. Let's say they don't say 60, right? They might say, well, actually, it's kind of a new position, or we weren't really expecting to be doing a new hire right now, so we don't really want to commit to an insanely high salary, or we usually don't like to pay new people that we don't have experience with yet in terms of seeing how you perform in the job that much. So we were really thinking closer to 55, to be honest with you. Now, here's what's good about this for you, because I said the two likely scenarios are good when you ask for more than you really want. So here's what you can do. So they say 55, or hell, let's just say they say 50. Like they go low end, they go with what everybody else is paying, right? And you said 60. Well, now what you can do is you can compromise, but it's a fake compromise. It just makes you look good and gives you leverage, and you gave up nothing. So you might then respond with, well, it is a good opportunity, and there's a lot of things about this company specifically that I like versus some other options. So I guess I could be willing to maybe come down to like 57. So what just happened? From their end, they think you compromised from 60 to 57. Now, did you compromise? No, because you want 55. That's your tripwire, right? That's better than other options. On the street, you'll get 50. 55 is a good deal. You didn't compromise. It's house's money, right? You're playing with fake chips. Okay, you're not gambling with real money at this point. They think you are because they don't know your tripwire. They can't see your cards, but it's a bluff, right? So you ask for more than you want when you're negotiating because you can take it back. You can pull it back. They think you've compromised. Now, by the way, it puts this social pressure on them to compromise as well. And this is actually a factor within, like, when people that study, or if you've taken classes in social psychology and if they've talked about persuasion, they'll talk about this, that like there's something called reciprocity of compromise, where people feel a need to treat you as you've treated them. And so when you make a compromise in a negotiation, they will feel like they should compromise too. So that person, that company will feel pressure, the person doing the interview, to come up from 50. Even if it's to 52. And you know what? If you get them up from 52, you're still winning. Hashtag winning town population U. Okay? Because you've just got them to go up from 50 to 52, which, by the way, means you've also got them to go up from the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, which was 50, right? You've got them to go up 2,000 without giving up anything. Maybe now you can go to 55 and say, well, that's kind of as low as I can go. And maybe they come up to 54 and say, well, that's the best I can do. And if you take 54, it's still a good deal, right? So generally, you do want to ask for more than you really want because you can pull it back later. They think you're giving them a break, and you're not giving them a break at all, right? This is like, I'm sure you've all experienced this. Again, learning's remembering. It's like when you go in the store and you see something on sale, and it's not really on sale because all they did was jack the price up, the original price, right? To put it on sale at the price that it really should be, right? Or that it always really is, right? Because it's always on sale. It's a fake compromise, right? All right, so use that to your advantage. All right, final slide here. Constructive conflict skills in general. Be aware of the nature of the problem, right? Is this a big deal? Deal breaker, big issue, small issue, right? And again, the people involved, their interests, all that sort of stuff. Consider the other side's point of view. Like, you've got to try to put yourself in their shoes. What are their interests? What would that person be seeking here? Like, you're essentially trying to do like a little audience analysis here. Timely deal with the situation. Don't let problems fester. They grow, they get bigger and bigger, and they become, a giant monkey on your back. You don't want to do that. You don't want them to grow and build into a bigger problem, right? So timely deal with things. Express yourself. Like, be willing to express your interests. Like, you can decide. There are situations where maybe you're not completely transparent about your interests. You want to keep some things close to the vest. That's certainly understandable. In fact, I mentioned in an earlier video that there's potential risks with disclosure and communication. But at the same time, if you want interests solved, you do have to express them, right? So it's like if that guy in the radio station example had not been willing to be transparent about, I don't really want to sell, I kind of need to retire. I set the money there because I just want money, and it seems 10 sounds like a nice round number, right? Then I maybe couldn't have given him an offer that would have made him happy because he wasn't telling me those things. So you have to judge what interest do you want to express or not, but that is something, express the ones that need to be expressed to fix the problem or for them to offer you a viable solution. and follow up on whether solutions are working or not. Okay. Or whether an agreement is working. Is it sustainable? You go back to that slide on what principled negotiation is really about. One of them is that it not just that it meets the interests of both parties, that it's a win-win, but that it's efficient, so you're not wasting time and resources, but it's sustainable. Can it work long term? So you want to follow up. Are you still happy with this, right? Because sometimes problems fester because the person's no longer happy with the situation or the agreement, right? And you can apply that to your interpersonal lives. Like, again, relationships, right? When I teach interpersonal communication, we talk about relationships in there. You think something's solved or addressed. You know what's a good little pro tip here from somebody who used to be in relationships? Follow up. Like, how are you feeling about things? Is this, is this working okay? Is this still a problem for you? Is this still bothering you? Right? Like, you don't have to do with everything, right? But obviously, for some things, follow up, see if the solution's still working, whether it's a business setting or professional setting. All right, so I hope that discussion is helpful in terms of how to resolve some conflicts, and hopefully, with principled negotiation, you have some specific action steps you can take to resolve conflicts. And hopefully, I will see you in the next video.